The arena did not sound broken, but it felt wrong, like a room where an argument had ended without resolution. The lights were up, the crowd was full, and yet the noise settled into an uneasy murmur that commentary struggled to explain. No music played, no graphics rolled. The ring sat untouched while cameras lingered on faces instead of action. People whispered, checked their phones, then looked back up as if expecting permission to react. On commentary, the voices tried to fill space, but every sentence landed softly, cautiously, as though speaking too loudly might trigger something irreversible. There was a pause that lasted too long to be accidental. Production delay, maybe, or something else. The crowd noticed it collectively, a shared awareness spreading without words. One commentator mentioned the date, then stopped himself, unsure why it mattered. Another tried to redirect toward tonight's advertised segments, but his tone carried doubt, not excitement. In the front rows, a few fans stood, then slowly sat back down, embarrassed by their own instinct. This was not anticipation, it was discomfort. The camera cut to the entrance ramp and stayed there. Still nothing. No countdown, no cue. Just a quiet, empty stretch of steel and LED boards glowing without purpose. The crowd noise dipped again, not into silence, but into something heavier, like breath being held. Somewhere in the upper deck, a chant tried to start and died immediately, swallowed by uncertainty. The commentators stopped talking altogether, letting the moment exist, even though it clearly wasn't supposed to. Then the lights dimmed slightly, not enough to signal an entrance, just enough to change the temperature of the room. A low ripple of confusion moved through the building. Someone near the barricade shook their head. Another fan laughed once, nervously, then covered their mouth.
Us?
On commentary, a quiet, strained question slipped out, asking if production was ready. No answer came through their headsets. When the first note finally played, it was wrong. It's not loud, not dramatic, barely recognizable. It didn't hit, it lingered, thin and uncomfortable, like sound leaking from another room. The reaction was not cheers. It was a scattered mix of gasps, groans, and stunned quiet. The camera hesitated before finding the curtain. Commentary didn't name anything. They couldn't. One voice whispered disbelief. Another sounded almost disappointed. As a figure stepped into view, the crowd did not rise together. Some stood, some stayed seated. Others turned away entirely. In that fractured response, it became clear this night was not moving forward. It was reopening something everyone thought had already closed. Security along the aisle shifted uneasily, unsure whether to move or remain invisible, mirroring the confusion on the screen. No official cues followed. No explanation arrived. The commentary table stayed silent again, not out of professionalism, but fear of saying the wrong thing too early. The audience understood instinctively that whatever was unfolding did not belong to a storyline. Yet everyone felt it would demand answers before the night ended. The figure did not rush. Every step down the ramp felt measured, almost reluctant, as if gravity itself were pulling them forward against their will. The music never swelled. It stayed low, unfinished, forcing the crowd to sit with the sound instead of riding it. Commentary returned in fragments, broken sentences layered with uncertainty. One voice acknowledged the person without naming them. Another questioned whether this was sanctioned. Neither sounded convinced by their own words. As the camera pushed closer, the reaction became harder to categorize. A few cheers broke through, thin and isolated, quickly smothered by boos that lacked energy. Some fans crossed their arms. Others held their phones but did not record. A woman near the aisle wiped her eyes, then looked angry at herself for doing it. The moment refused to tell people how to feel, and that was what unsettled them most. The person reached the ring and stopped. They did not climb the steps immediately. They looked out instead, scanning faces that no longer trusted them. The commentators fell silent again, not for effect, but because there was nothing safe to say. A producer's voice leaked faintly into one headset, then cut out. The ring announcer remained seated, hands folded, waiting for instructions that never came. When the figure finally entered the ring, the noise shifted into something sharper. Not louder, just tighter. The ropes moved under unfamiliar weight. A referee slid in cautiously, eyes darting toward ringside officials. The returning figure stood in the center, breathing heavily, hands resting on their hips, absorbing the room without acknowledging it. No pose, no signal, no attempt to control the reaction. A chant started, then split in half. One side shouted a name, the other drowned it out with rejection.
Ow.
Both faded quickly, embarrassed by their own volume. Commentary tried again, this time admitting confusion outright. They questioned timing. They questioned intent. One voice asked whether this was fair to the locker room. The question hung unanswered. The figure finally reached for a microphone, and the building quieted instinctively, not out of respect, but necessity. This was the moment people feared. The microphone shook slightly in their hand. They opened their mouth, then closed it. Long breath passed. Someone in the front row yelled something cruel. Another shouted something forgiving. Neither response seemed to land. When words came, they were not loud. They did not project. The voice sounded older than anyone remembered, weighed down by something beyond injury or time. The first sentence was incomplete, trailing off as the crowd reacted again, divided, restless. Commentary stopped entirely, letting the raw audio breathe. Whatever this was, it was no longer an appearance. It was a confrontation, unfolding without choreography, without safety nets. And as the figure stood there, exposed and uncertain, it became clear that SmackDown was no longer in control of the moment. The moment had claimed the show. The words that followed did not explain anything. They only deepened the fracture. The returning figure spoke slowly, choosing phrases that sounded rehearsed once, then abandoned. Apologies hovered without landing. Justifications surfaced and were pulled back mid-sentence. The crowd reacted in waves rather than bursts, sound rolling unevenly through the arena. Commentary remained silent, but cameras caught the commentators exchanging looks that said more than narration ever could. When the microphone lowered, the silence was worse than noise. It pressed in from every side, forcing people to confront what they had just heard without guidance. A referee leaned in, quietly asking if they were finished. The figure nodded once, then stayed exactly where they were. No exit music played. No one seemed brave enough to trigger it. Backstage, the tension moved faster. Monitors flickered with the live feed as producers argued in hushed voices that still sounded too loud. Some wanted the segment cut short. Others insisted pulling it now would only make things worse. A veteran agent shook his head, muttering that this was never supposed to happen like this. Nearby, younger talent watched with expressions caught between awe and resentment, wondering what this meant for their own place. In the locker room, reactions split just as sharply. A few stared at the screen, arms folded, saying nothing. Others turned away entirely, lacing boots with unnecessary force. One performer laughed bitterly and asked, "Who thought this was a good idea?" No one answered. The unspoken fear was that someone did think it was a good idea, and that person still held power. Social media exploded, not with celebration, but argument. Clips spread faster than context could follow. Headlines formed in real time, each framing the moment differently. Some called it brave, others called it reckless. Phones buzzed nonstop at ringside as staff received messages they were not ready to read. This was no longer a television segment. It was a problem that had escaped the building. The figure finally left the ring without ceremony, sliding between the ropes and walking back up the ramp alone. The crowd parted instinctively, security stepping in late, unsure whether they were protecting the performer or the audience. A few fans reached out. Most did not. The music still did not play. As the show stumbled forward, commentary returned, voices strained, choosing careful words that satisfied no one. They acknowledged the moment it happened, but offered no interpretation. In doing so, they admitted the truth. This was bigger than storyline logic, bigger than creative plans. Later, alone in a quiet hallway, the returning figure sat with their head in their hands. The adrenaline faded, replaced by weight. Whatever they hoped to reclaim did not come rushing back. Instead, they felt the unmistakable shift of something closing behind them. The door they walked through might never open the same way again, and for the first time, they seemed to understand that some returns are not about coming home, but about facing what you left unfinished. By the time the camera stopped rolling, the building felt smaller, compressed by what had been allowed to happen. Hallways buzzed with forced professionalism, people moving with purpose while avoiding eye contact. The returning figure was escorted not to medical, not to an office, but to a quiet room usually reserved for damage control. No one said that out loud. They didn't have to. Silence on the walk there carried its own accusation. Inside, the conversation was brief and strained. Questions were asked without warmth. Answers came without confidence. No one raised their voice, which somehow made it worse. The figure listened, nodding, absorbing consequences that were not yet defined. They were told the reaction was mixed, a word that softened nothing. They were reminded that families watched, that sponsors watched. The locker room watched most closely of all. Elsewhere, the locker room had not moved on. A small group argued openly, frustration spilling over into blame. One performer said this reopened wounds that never healed. Another snapped back that wounds never heal if you pretend they don't exist. A veteran sat quietly, staring at the floor, finally admitting they didn't know how to feel. That admission seemed to upset people more than any opinion. Media requests stacked up immediately. Statements were drafted, redrafted, then abandoned. Executives debated whether acknowledging the moment would legitimize it further. Others worried silence would look like cowardice. Phones rang unanswered. The company's carefully controlled image felt suddenly fragile, exposed by a single unscripted weight standing in the ring. At home, the returning figure's family watched the clip on a muted television. The volume was unnecessary. They recognized the posture, the hesitation, the voice cracking at the wrong time. One family member turned away, unable to watch the rest. Another defended them reflexively, then stopped, unsure if that defense still held. The moment did not stay in the arena. It followed them into living rooms where applause could not drown it out. Later that night, alone again, the figure scrolled through reactions they promised themselves not to read. Praise cut just as sharply as criticism. Every supportive message carried an implied challenge. Every negative one confirmed fears they had tried to outrun. The phone slipped from their hand, landing face down on the floor. They did not pick it up. What settled in was not regret for returning, but uncertainty about why. The ring had not offered absolution. The audience had not delivered judgment cleanly. Instead, everything existed in between, unresolved and uncomfortable. That was the cost no one warned them about. As SmackDown faded into memory, the industry quietly recalibrated around the damage. Creative plans shifted, trust wavered, lines hardened where they used to blur. And somewhere in that recalibration, it became clear that the moment had not healed anything. It had only proven that some scars, once shown under the brightest lights, refused to fade back into the dark. In the days that followed, the moment refused to settle into a single meaning. It lingered in conversations that stopped when someone new entered the room. It surfaced in meetings where people spoke carefully, circling around what they actually wanted to say. Officially, it was referred to as that segment. Unofficially, it became a dividing line, before it and after it. The returning figure stayed away from the building, not suspended, not banned, simply absent, which felt heavier than any punishment. Rumors filled the gap quickly, each one contradicting the last. Some said they were remorseful. Others claimed they felt vindicated. The truth was quieter and harder to share. They were tired, not physically, but emotionally, in a way rest could not fix. When they finally broke their silence, it was not in front of cameras. It was in a private conversation with someone who had been there long enough to know when things were truly broken. They admitted they did not expect forgiveness. Right. They also admitted they did not expect the weight to feel this permanent. The listener offered no comfort, only honesty. Some doors close slowly, and you do not hear the latch until it is already too late. Inside the company, plans moved forward without them, not out of spite, but necessity. Television demands momentum, and unresolved tension does not always translate to weekly programming. New stories were told, new faces filled time, yet the shadow remained, because everyone knew the silence was intentional. Ignoring something does not erase it. It only teaches people what not to say aloud. Fans continued to argue, not loudly, not explosively, but persistently. The clip never stopped circulating. Context never fully caught up. Some saw bravery, others saw selfishness. Many saw themselves reflected uncomfortably in the hesitation, the flawed delivery, the refusal to play the role expected of them. That discomfort kept the conversation alive long after louder moments faded. Alone one evening, the returning figure stood in front of a mirror, replaying the night not as the world saw it, but as they felt it. The silence before the music, the divided noise, the moment their voice failed to carry. They realized then that returns are often framed as reclamation. This one had been a reckoning instead. January 16th, 2026 was never meant to be a highlight. It was a reminder that wrestling, at its most real, does not offer clean endings. It exposes people, then leaves them to live with what was exposed. The arena moved on. The show continued. But something fundamental shifted quietly, without a definitive conclusion. And somewhere between absence and memory, the question remained unanswered, heavy and unavoidable. Was this moment meant to repair the past, or was it proof that some things, once broken in front of everyone, cannot be put back together again?